In the year 1988, a real estate developer named Jim Sparks was dragged out of his bed in Houston, Texas, pulled straight through the solid wall of his own home, and taken aboard a craft that did not belong to this world. But unlike almost every other case you may have heard, Jim Sparks did not wake up the next morning with a blank in his memory and a strange bruise he could not explain. He remembered nearly all of it. No hypnosis, no trance, no fog of forgetting. 95% conscious recall, night after night, for almost 2 decades. And what he claimed to remember was not a single terrifying encounter, but hundreds of them. A long and brutal education at the hands of beings he came to call the Keepers. Over those years, according to Jim, his abductors put him through what he described as an alien boot camp, forced him to learn a symbol language that responded to thought, revealed towering reptilian creatures hiding behind holographic human faces, and finally handed him a warning meant for all of us. A warning that the Earth is dying and that the people in charge already have the means to save it and are hiding it. But today, in this episode of Alien Encounters, I will tell you the whole story of the case and the truth the witness revealed about the subject. Welcome. To understand what happened to Jim Sparks, you first have to understand the man himself, because he was not the kind of person you might expect to build a life around alien contact. His real name was Vincent James Sparacino. He was born on November 15, 1954 in South Florida to Italian-American parents, and he grew up there before studying business and real estate at community colleges in Miami and later in Houston. In 1979, his company transferred him to Houston, Texas, and it was there that he began his career in earnest, working in real estate before founding his own natural land development company, J&J Properties, which operated mainly in North Carolina. By every account, Vincent Sparacino was a practical, grounded man. He bought land, subdivided it, and sold it. The kind of work that keeps your feet firmly on the earth and your mind on numbers and contracts. And yet even here, in the middle of a career built on developing land, there was a detail that would later feel almost prophetic. He had a strong conservationist streak. When he divided lots, researchers noted, he deliberately arranged them to preserve as many existing trees as possible. Long before he ever claimed to receive an ecological warning from beyond the stars, Jim Sparks already carried an instinct to protect what was living around him. He was married to a woman named Teresa. Their marriage was not an easy one. There were turbulent periods, separations, and eventual reconciliation. And here is a strange and quiet thread that runs through the whole account. Jim claimed that Teresa herself was also being taken, that she too was an abductee, but she refused, absolutely and permanently, to acknowledge it or discuss it. Whatever was happening in that house at night, according to Jim, it was happening to both of them, and only one of them was willing to look at it directly. Those who studied his case described him in careful, almost reluctant terms. Down to earth, articulate, filled importantly with a healthy sense of self-doubt. This was not a man eager to be believed. In fact, his first reaction to his own experiences was not wonder or faith. It was rage. It was terror. He fought his abductors with everything he had for years before anything in him began to change. That slow, grinding shift from a furious captive to a man who accepted a sense of responsibility is one of the most unusual and controversial features of the entire case. Just stay with the story to the end, and you will see exactly how it unfolded and what he says he was finally shown. It began, he says, in 1988. Jim was living in Houston when the first intrusions came, and they were not gentle. In his own words, taken from the preface of the book he would later write, he put the sheer scale of it plainly. He said, quote, "I have been abducted so many times since 1988, I have lost count," end quote. Think about that for a moment. Not a single event to be replayed and analyzed for the rest of a lifetime, but so many that a careful, detail-oriented businessman simply gave up counting them. The early abductions followed a pattern he described in vivid physical detail. He would be pulled from his bed and then, impossibly, pulled through the solid material of the house itself, through the wall, through the ceiling. His body passing through what should have been immovable barriers, as if they were nothing at all. Doing the lifting and the carrying were small entities, 3 to 4 feet tall, with gray skin and large, dark, utterly emotionless eyes. Jim described a detail that many abductees mention, but that is rarely comfortable to dwell on. These small beings carried with them a strong sulfurous smell, like rotten eggs, an odor that clung to the whole experience. Jim did not regard these small gray figures as the intelligence in charge. He came to see them almost as drones, as worker units or androids that executed tasks. They did the transporting. They managed the medical examinations. They performed the procedures, including, he claimed, the extraction of his sperm. Behind them, directing them, were different beings entirely. Taller gray entities, significantly larger than the little workers, with a presence he described as highly intelligent and commanding. These taller ones communicated through telepathy. Thoughts pressed directly into his mind, and they watched him with deep, dark eyes. They were the educators, the administrators, the ones running the program. And there was, unmistakably, a program, because the abductions were not random torment. They had a purpose, and that purpose became clear over the years that followed. From roughly 1988 through 1993, Jim Sparks says he was put through school. Not a school any human ever attended, but an alien classroom. He would find himself seated aboard the craft in front of what he could only describe as 3-dimensional computer screens, glowing displays that hung in the air, and he was made to learn. What he was made to learn was a language, not a spoken language, and not one written in any alphabet from Earth. It was a system of symbols, and the truly strange part, the part that separates this account from ordinary tales of alien writing, was how it worked. The symbols responded to thought, to operate them, to select and arrange and read them. Jim had to use his mind directly. The technology was thought-activated. When he concentrated correctly, the symbols answered. When he did not, nothing happened. And Jim, being who he was, refused. For years he resisted. He describes fighting the lessons, sabotaging them, throwing tantrums of rage against beings who could pull him through walls. He did not want to be their student. He did not want to cooperate with the very creatures who were terrifying him and violating him in the night. This is one of the most human parts of the whole account, this stubborn, furious refusal to give an inch. But according to Jim, the sessions never stopped. Night after night, session after session, the taller supervisors returned him to the screens, and slowly, grindingly, over the span of years, his resistance wore down. He began to capitulate. He began, at last, to learn. To understand why a case like this attracted serious attention, you have to know something about the world Jim Sparks stepped into when he finally began to speak. This was the era when abduction research had entered the mainstream conversation. At Harvard University, the respected psychiatrist John Mack was interviewing hundreds of self-described experiencers and taking their psychological states seriously as a subject of study. And investigating Jim Sparks specifically was one of the most well-known figures in the entire field, the Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, Moulton Howe. Moulton Howe recorded hours of audio interviews with Jim over the years and documented his accounts in detail in her book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. It was through that careful journalistic attention that Jim's story reached a wide audience, and it was in an interview with her, years later in 2006, that he tried to explain the single most bewildering aspect of what he had witnessed, the nature of the beings themselves. He said, quote, "What really intrigues me is the ETs can be 5% to 10% in this dimension on this physical plane, while the rest is in another dimension." End quote. That idea that these beings were only partially here, only a fraction of themselves visible and solid in our reality, while the rest existed somewhere else, would come to explain in Jim's mind everything from how they walked through walls to how they simply appeared and vanished. It was his way of making sense of the impossible physics of his own abductions. Now, something in the story shifts, because after the years of forced schooling, after the resistance and the slow surrender, the relationship between Jim and his captors began to change. And the moment that marked that change is one of the strangest and most mocked in the entire record. It was the winter of 1993 into 1994. Jim was in Fort Myers Beach, Florida, and had recently reconciled with his wife. One night, an entity appeared in his bedroom. But this time, it did not come as a gray drone or a towering supervisor. It came, according to Jim, disguised as a human being. And not just any human being. It appeared as a classic gangster, a mobster in a suit, and it spoke to him in a stereotypical wise guy accent. The message it delivered was almost comically blunt. It said, quote, "The boss wants to see ya," end quote. Jim later understood this figure to be what researchers call a screen memory, or a screen image, a holographic disguise projected by a non-human visitor, chosen, it seemed, to reduce his fear. And whether or not you can accept such a thing, and skeptics have had a great deal to say about it, what followed was different from everything before. Jim was escorted calmly down to the beach. He boarded a craft that floated there waiting for him. And for the first time, there was no paralyzing terror, no violent extraction through a wall. He walked aboard, in a sense, as a guest. Researchers and Jim himself marked this as the turning point, the moment he crossed the line from captive to participant. It is worth pausing here, because this transition is exactly what makes Jim Sparks so divisive. To his supporters, it represented a genuine evolution of contact, a growing trust between a man and the intelligences studying him. To psychologists and skeptics, it looked like something else entirely, a textbook example of what happens when a person is held, frightened, and dependent on their captors for long enough. Some have pointed to the pattern by name, the way a hostage can come to identify with, even defend, those who hold them. Whichever lens you use, the fact remains that from this point forward, Jim's accounts change in tone. The fear recedes, the cooperation deepens, and the revelations begin to come. Then came May of 1995, and the night that would define the rest of Jim Sparks' life. He was living in North Carolina by then. At 3:30 in the morning, he was jolted awake by a sound, a loud, low-frequency howling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His body froze. The familiar paralysis gripped him, and then, once again, he felt himself lifted and drawn through the wall of his bedroom, out into the dark. Everything went black. When his awareness returned, he was descending, slowly, gently, floating downward through the night air. And below him, as his eyes adjusted, he saw something out of a fever dream. An abandoned amusement park, empty, silent, and there, rising against the sky, the rusting skeleton of a decaying roller coaster. It was into this desolate, forgotten place that Jim Sparks was lowered. And as his feet touched the ground, he realized he was not alone. Surrounding him, closing in a loose circle, were roughly a dozen figures. But these were not the small grays, nor even the taller supervisors. These were enormous, 6.5 to 7 feet tall, with massive muscular upper bodies. Jim would later reach for the only comparison that fit, saying they were built like football linebackers. And at first, they wore human faces, glowing, holographic human features projected over whatever lay beneath. By now, Jim had come far enough in his strange education that he was no longer simply a screaming victim. He was curious, bold even. And so, standing in that ruined amusement park surrounded by giants, he made a request. In his own words, he pleaded, quote, "Please, I don't want to go yet. I want to see what you really look like," end quote. The beings hesitated, and then, According to Jim, they granted his wish. The holographic human faces dropped away. What stood revealed nearly stopped his heart. Their skin was covered in green and dark scales, like a reptile. Their faces were snake-like, lizard-like, with elongated features, utterly unlike anything human. And their eyes were diamond-shaped, with reddish pupils that seemed to look straight through him. Their hands were massive, thick-fingered, powerful. These were the reptilian humanoids, and to a terrified human standing alone in the dark, they were the stuff of nightmares. Jim's fear surged back all at once, but in that moment of raw panic, his mind clung to a small detail, a promise the beings had apparently made. And in what may be the most oddly human sentence in the entire case, he stammered out a reminder. He said, quote, "Hey, you promised to, wave," end quote. And remarkably, according to Jim, they did. These towering, scaled, red-eyed creatures raised their giant hands and executed a slow, deliberate, peaceful waving gesture. A gesture meant, it seemed, to reassure him. There is something almost unbearably strange about that image. A dozen reptilian giants in an abandoned carnival, waving politely at a frightened real estate developer to calm him down. Whatever else you make of Jim Sparks, moments like this are why researchers found him so hard to dismiss and so hard to categorize. The details were too specific, too odd, too free of the usual cliches. These reptilian beings, Jim came to understand, were authoritative and profoundly telepathic. And unlike the Greys with their genetic programs and medical procedures, the reptilians seemed focused on something larger, something about the survival of the Earth itself. They were, he believed, near the top of whatever hierarchy governed his abductors. And it was they who began to steer his experiences toward a single, urgent theme. That theme reached its fullest expression the following year, in 1996, in an event that stands as one of the most dramatic and most impossible to verify in Jim's entire account. He was transported one night to a forest clearing, and when he arrived, he found himself among people, human beings, roughly 15 other men and women, gathered together in the open air. Most of them were in their nightclothes, some were nude, all of them were caught in the same paralysis Jim knew so well, and many were crying, trapped in silent, motionless terror. This was, by Jim's telling, a mass abduction. More than a dozen ordinary people plucked from their beds and brought together in one place. And here, his years of training were finally given a purpose he could understand. The taller beings communicated with him telepathically and gave him a role. They asked him to act as what he called a keeper. His job was to move among the frightened captives and calm them, to reassure these strangers that they were not about to die, that they should not resist. The man who had once fought his abductors with pure rage was now being asked to soothe others through the very ordeal he had once endured. It is from this event and this role that the title of his eventual book would come. And once the crowd was calmed, the beings showed them all something. Massive screens appeared in the air, multi-dimensional displays far larger and more vivid than the training screens Jim had studied for years. And across those screens played images of the Earth. Not scenes of wonder, but scenes of destruction. Environmental devastation on a planetary scale. Jim described being shown, again and again, the burning of the rainforests of Central and South America, vast tracts of living forest consumed by fire, the lungs of the planet being torn out. The message was not subtle. It was a warning, delivered to more than a dozen human witnesses at once. The Earth, they were being told, is dying. The urgent alarm about the burning of the South American rainforests that Jim claimed to receive corresponds directly to a documented real-world ecological crisis, one that scientists and governments have been sounding warnings about for decades. Whatever the source of Jim's visions, the underlying concern was and remains entirely real. The revelations, according to Jim, went further than images of fire. Over his years of contact, and especially in the mid to late 1990s, he says the beings pressed a series of specific, explosive claims into his mind. And the one that enraged him most concerned energy. He was told, he says, that highly advanced clean energy technologies, along with methods to produce abundant food, had already been given to humanity, freely, gifted by extraterrestrials to human governments and to military leaders, and that these gifts had been buried, suppressed, locked away by powerful men who saw clean, free energy not as salvation, but as a threat to corporate profits, a threat they were willing to frame in terms of national security. Jim's reaction, directed telepathically at the beings themselves, was pure fury. He demanded, quote, "You mean to tell me our people in power have the ability to save and better this planet, and they aren't doing it?" End quote. That single sentence became the engine of the rest of his life. The picture the beings painted, as Jim relayed it, was grim and sweeping. A genetic hybridization program, they told him, was actively underway, using human genetic material to breed a hybrid human-alien race, an insurance policy for survival should our species fail. Humanity, they said, was causing severe and possibly irreversible damage to the planet. Governments and secret elite cabals had illegally suppressed the technologies that could reverse it. And because agreements made long ago with world leaders, agreements to gradually reveal the alien presence to the public, had been broken and violated by those very governments, the beings had changed their strategy. They were now bypassing the authorities entirely. They were reaching out directly to ordinary citizens, to people like Jim, in an effort to reach a critical mass of awareness from the ground up. And the final revelation was perhaps the most humbling of all. Humanity, Jim was told, is isolated in the cosmos, quarantined by its own ignorance and violence. We are considered far too dangerous to be welcomed into the wider galactic neighborhood, and we will remain so until we learn to stop destroying our own home. We are not being kept out by distance in this telling. We are being kept out by ourselves. Amid all of these cosmic warnings, Jim also described smaller, stranger, more personal moments. There was, he claimed, a young girl. She appeared to be about 12 years old, frail and thin, with a pointed chin and short, thin, dirty blonde hair. Her nose looked human, but slightly too small. She stood completely still and stared at him without blinking. Jim came to believe that this child was his hybrid daughter, created from the sperm the small Greys had extracted from him over the years. Whatever the truth of it, he spoke of her not with horror, but with a kind of aching, uncertain tenderness. And then there was the present. During one shipboard encounter in 1996, the beings gave Jim a gift. It was a small black box. When he looked inside, he found it contained a thick, dark brown tar-like substance. And into his mind came the explanation. They had, they told him, medically cleansed his lungs, removing years of accumulated tar from heavy cigarette smoking. The dark mass in the box, they conveyed, was what they had taken out of him. According to Jim, the effect was profound. He quit smoking. He adopted a vegetarian diet. He changed how in 2006, he documented everything in his book, The Keepers, an alien message for the human race. It was later translated into multiple languages, and it laid out, in his own words, the arc of his abductions, his schooling, the reptilians, the clearing, and above all, the warning. From there, Jim stepped fully into public life. He became a sought-after lecturer, presenting at gatherings like the International UFO Congress and appearing frequently on the late-night radio program Coast to Coast AM, where his conscious, detailed recall set him apart from so many others. But he wanted more than an audience. He wanted action. Drawing directly on the warnings he believed he had been given about suppressed technology, Jim began campaigning for something concrete. He proposed what he called a National Security Information Amnesty Bill. The idea was strikingly practical. He wanted a legal framework, modeled on South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that would allow government and military employees who knew of hidden extraterrestrial technologies to come forward and release them without fear of prosecution. Give the whistleblowers amnesty, he argued, and the truth and the clean energy would follow. He even worked to establish a political action committee to fund rainforest conservation and to campaign for that amnesty bill. Whatever one believes about his abductions, this was a man trying to build a legal political mechanism to fix the very crisis he said he had been shown. And throughout it all, he claimed he was being watched. Jim believed that government intelligence agencies took an intense interest in him, and specifically in his memory. Not so much in the flying craft or the beings, but in the symbol alphabet he had been forced to learn. That thought-activated language, he felt, was the thing they most wanted to understand. In his later years, the man who had spent so long trying to reach a critical mass of awareness began, quietly, to withdraw. He stepped back from the public eye. His official website went dark. The lectures grew fewer. And on September 27, 2023, Vincent James Sparacino, the man the world knew as Jim Sparks, passed away in Augusta, Georgia, at the age of 68. He was survived by Teresa, the wife he had once claimed shared his experiences and who had never been willing to speak of them. He left behind a book, hours of recorded interviews with a respected journalist, a proposed piece of legislation, and a question that refuses to settle. Was Jim Sparks a man who genuinely endured hundreds of conscious contacts and came back carrying a warning we would be foolish to ignore? Was he the victim of some profound psychological process, transforming terror into meaning over long, dark years? Or was he a sincere man weaving real ecological fear and old conspiracy theories into a story he came wholly to believe? The dossier of his life gives no final answer, and neither will I pretend to. What can be said is that Jim Sparks never asked for wealth or power from his account. He asked for something stranger and, in its way, more demanding. He asked us to look at what we are doing to our own planet, to consider that the tools to save it might already be locked in a vault somewhere, and to imagine that somewhere out in the dark, something is watching to see whether we will finally grow up. He claimed the beings told him we are alone, not because the universe is empty, but because we have made ourselves too dangerous to know. And whether that message came from reptilian giants in an abandoned amusement park, or from the depths of one troubled and remarkable human mind, it is a message that still, uncomfortably, sounds like it might be worth hearing. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and leave a comment below with what you believe really happened to Jim Sparks. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.